everyone, today I have a real-world review of the Samyang 24-70mm f2.8 lens. I'm going to be sharing with you how this lens performs out in the field at a portrait photo shoot, and we're going to be testing it out for both photo and video, so let's get started with some autofocus tests in stills mode. I'm using the Sony A7 III for these autofocus tests in stills mode, and I'm starting off on the widest end, which is 24mm. I'm using a wide focus area with continuous autofocus and IAF on to make the camera and lens do all the work so we can see the performance. I'm so pleased to see that the autofocus is solid and keeps up with me without an issue. Next up, on the 70mm end of the lens, the autofocus is still keeping up with me. If you're wondering how this lens will perform on the A7 IV or other Sony cameras, it will at the very least be the same as this, or even better, since the A7 III does now have the older Sony IAF compared to their other camera bodies. So let's go to our portrait photo shoot.
That's so pretty. There's a spider web then. Do you mind sitting on one of the branches?
Samyang is known for their prime lenses, so I was super excited to hear that they are releasing their first ever zoom lens for Sony E-mount. I personally love Samyang lenses for portrait photography because of the way they render and the overall look it gives to a photo. My personal favorite is the Samyang 85mm f1.8 AF lens. I was very curious to see if their zoom lens would be something completely different or still have that same signature look. We are starting off with some simple portraits in the shade here, and as you can see from these first few photos, I think this 24-70 has that same look as their prime lenses.
If you sit here, you can have like your legs outstretched further, like. Thank you. You're welcome. So I'm getting like a full body shot here. I like that with your arms just kind of hanging in your waist. It's very chill.
This 24-70 is nice and sharp, but not too over sharp that it looks clinical. I love what the render of this lens looks like. It's so flattering for skin. Rendering and the feeling of the lens is so subjective, so let me know what you think in the comments. I also have a quick comparison here of photos that were taken on different days, but I tried to find similar lighting between the Samyang 24-70 versus the GM 85mm f1.4 for a close-up shot. As I always say, gear is only as good as the worst conditions you put it through. So for our next photos, I chose a spot in our location with dappled light to see how the lens handles focusing with trickier lighting and to see how the image quality turns out. I shot portraits at most focal lengths throughout the lens, and none had any issues getting focused in these dappled light spots.
Okay, that looks so cool. Just looks like a jungle behind you.
When I first took this lens out of the box, I was like, whoa, it looks so big. This 24-70 f2.8 weighs 1,027 grams, so it is a little bit heavier compared to Sony's 24-70, which is 890 grams, but this lens is also pricier. On the other hand, in the same price range, it weighs only 7 grams heavier than the Sigma 24-70, which is 1,020 grams. I usually prefer using smaller and lighter lenses, however, I was actually pretty impressed at how comfortable it feels in my hands while using it during our shoot. It also features a custom mode switch which lets you change the function of the autofocus ring to aperture control. In terms of size, this Samyang 24-70 is 128.5mm long and has external zoom, which is great for keeping down the size for photographers. Since they are also marketing this lens towards videographers, it's a little bit of a shame that it's not internal zoom. I assume they're catering this lens more towards wedding videographers, for example, who keep their setup as small as possible and are not using a matte box. In terms of focus performance and accuracy, what you saw in my autofocus examples earlier in this video is how this lens felt like it was performing during our portrait photo shoot. Even on the A7 III, I was able to rely on IAF to get my photos in focus. Usually I use a small focus point in case IAF can't keep up with my subject, but I didn't really need to rely on that focus point with this lens. Even though there weren't many, I did have some out of focus photos. There was a very small amount of photos that focused on Birdie's eyebrows, eyelashes, or nose instead of her iris. But again, it was so minimal that I was able to pick heaps of final images that were tack sharp on her eyes. So overall, this lens had great focus accuracy while I was using it. So far, we've seen heaps of unedited examples of the photos I've been taking at various focal lengths throughout the lens. You can see that the sharpness is consistent throughout.
A little bit of movement if you could like kick your legs around. Yeah.
I would say on the wider end of the lens is where you see a little loss of detail, but this is me nitpicking. I would still use these photos in a final edit as they are in focus and sharp enough for my liking.
Yeah, you can even kick towards me, it looks kind of cool.
Where I think this lens shines with sharpness is from 50mm onwards. Those were usually my favorite photos that I captured from the day. I can't get over how beautiful the render of this lens is. It's so gorgeous for portraits. I absolutely love Samyang glass for photos, and I'm so happy that their first zoom lens has the same feeling as their primes.
I'm just getting like a close up there. The lighting is so pretty. Your skin's glowing in this spot.
I was waiting and waiting for the sun to come out, and it finally did. I think this has been a theme at our shoots recently. The bokeh is so beautiful. I really like the way that it looks. Here's a comparison shot between the Tamron 35-150 bokeh around the same focal length and a comparison between the Sony GM 24-70 around the same focal length too. The bokeh looks very similar on all three lenses and also looks great on all three lenses.
I'll go a bit lower so I can get more sun. Yeah, actually I can get like a wide shot if you wanted to kick towards me again.
This lens has pretty good control with chromatic aberration. It was only occurring in spots where I heavily overexposed. I was exposing for my subject's face as I didn't want her to look too dark in the shot, and again, using very exaggerated natural lighting to see what this lens can handle. This is still a minimal amount of CA, so it is easily corrected in software such as Lightroom. This Samyang 24-70mm f2.8 does have a pretty significant lens flare, as you can see in some of these shots, but I like how it's off to the bottom half of the image, which makes it a lot easier to work with if you shoot portraits. So even though this lens flare is quite large and defined, it at least doesn't cover my subject's face with my compositions. Towards the end, I did get a lens flare in the top half of the frame going over Birdie's face, but I personally like this particular lens flare. It's just a circle and white in color, so it blends into the photo.
That's cool.
Also, I needed to show you this because I found the most beautiful lens flare with some photos we took a little later on in the day where it was like right at golden hour, and look at these! Isn't that lens flare gorgeous? It just blends into the photo and looks so magical. I love it. But you can't look at these photos yet because I am working on a video for these that I can't wait to share later. Also, here's a random extra photo of a flower that I took to show you that we also have a minimum focusing distance of 35cm on this lens.
As always with the zoom lens, I want to show you guys the range of focal lengths that we have with this 24-70. So I'm going to take a photo of Birdie while standing in the same spot, and I'll go from 70mm to 24mm and put the photos up side by side for you guys to look at. So we'll start off at 70mm, which is a mid-length shot. And now I want to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to move around and frame each photo to look the same. And then
So let's check this lens out for video. We'll start off with some autofocus tests on the A7S III, and just like photo, autofocus keeps up really well at both the wide and long end of this lens. So I want to take this moment to say that so far everything sounds amazing, right? Well, the one issue I have with this lens is the fact that Samyang are claiming that this is a lens with parfocal function. From my experience with this lens in particular, it's not parfocal. This could be because of a firmware issue, maybe this is something they can update in the future, or it could be a quality control issue, but you can see in these shots here where Dan is zooming in and out that the focus does shift while zooming. For example, if it's a true manual focus parfocal lens like the Rokinon MK18-55, you set the focus at a chosen focal length and that subject will stay in focus while you're zooming in or out. You might notice that while we're zooming, it's going out of focus and then coming back again, and this clip here is in manual focus. It seems that instead of being optically parfocal, it's trying to keep the subject in focus while zooming via electronic focus, regardless of if you are in auto or manual. This is why I think there's a possibility that they might tweak this issue in a firmware update in the future if it's not just an issue with my copy. In regards to updates though, this is just me speculating. I don't have any information whether they can or will do that. Just to be sure, for the first time ever, I'm whipping out the calibration charts on my channel to show you again. I tried zooming in and out slowly, fast, in manual focus, in autofocus, and nothing seemed to change this shift in focus you can see happening while it's zooming. I also tried it plenty of times in both manual and autofocus on a few different Sony bodies. Here's a few extra photos I took during our shoot for you to look at just while I wrap up this point about parfocal. If Samyang didn't claim that this lens is parfocal, I would be saying that I think this 24-70 does a great job at quickly finding focus on your subject while zooming for the price point of this lens. The shift in focus is minimal while zooming, but I have to be honest that at least the lens that I have is not parfocal. As a comparison, the new GM 70-200 f2.8 Mark II does not claim to be parfocal. However, it does achieve the results that this Samyang lens is trying to reach. The 70-200 does a fantastic job at keeping focus on the subject while zooming in and out due to its optical design and autofocus speed, however, at a much higher price point. Anyway, back to the video test. I also did a focus breathing test at both 24 and 70mm so you can see what it looks like. I think it's very minimal focus breathing. And finally, Dan got some 4K slow-mo shots of Bokeh so we can take a closer look at focusing and video quality. I think this lens is absolutely amazing value for money. This is such a stunning photography lens, especially for portraits. It has such a beautiful quality about it, and I think it's a great video lens too. Dan and I own a dozen manual Samyang primes for video, and while this 24-70 is not parfocal, we both agree it's still a fantastic lens. It has the signature Samyang look, and I still think this lens is good quality and bang for buck. So for the price, you are getting a great photo and video zoom lens.
So that's it for today's review of the Samyang 24-70 f2.8. Let me know what you think of the photos, of the lens, of the review down in the comments below. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I make new videos every single week, so I'll see you all next time. Bye!